I think we have 6 students registered. I see some familiar names. It's nice to see you. And nice to see you, Dennis. Thank you for your help behind the
Nice to
scenes.
see you, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm mindful of everyone's time. Do I have 45 minutes or an hour? What do you guys have after this? Do you have a class?
I think everyone's pretty much free until I think you have a full hour.
An hour. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, good to see you, James. It's been a while.
Yes, it's been a while. Nice seeing you as well. Hopefully, everything's
Yeah,
well on your side.
everything's going as well as can be in spite of all the craziness. And Roxana, I don't see you, but I see your name. Welcome. Isela, I don't know you, but welcome.
Hi, I'm from Kern County.
Wonderful. Great. I'm so glad you're joining us. And I don't know Megan either, but welcome. Okay. I'm gonna it's already 8 minutes after. Dennis, I guess more will just join as they can log in. I'm gonna get started.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Erica Flores Baltodano. I've had the pleasure and thrill of teaching Con Law 2 at San Luis Obispo College of Law, and I'm actually preparing an elective for this summer on voting rights, which probably doesn't surprise my former students at all because that was such a passion of mine. But I'm here today, and actually you can go ahead and start the slideshow, Dennis. And what I'm going to do is start out by once you can see what I'm talking about, just put up some key items from my bio, just so that you can see that I'm speaking with you today with a great deal of experience mentoring students, hiring and supervising young attorneys. In the nonprofit and also the private law firm sector, and advising nonprofits and small businesses in all aspects of employment, including the hiring process. So we can go to the next slide. And do you want to just make it full screen? Is that possible? Okay. Up to probably slideshow. Yeah, play from the start. Yeah, and then you can probably just arrow through it. There you go. So just some items from my bio. Today, I also serve as a County of San Luis Obispo Civil Service Commissioner, which means that I serve in a quasi-judicial role, adjudicating employment claims or employment disputes regarding county employees, and also advising county HR with respect to the county's employment rules, the civil service rules. So I have definitely seen a lot of resumes in my career, and I'm going to tell you, from experience, that an employer can decide in just a few minutes whether to toss a resume in the recycle bin, to set it aside for further consideration, or to schedule an interview right away. I call these the no, maybe, and yes piles. And that's just because I used to, receive everything by paper and literally put it into piles of what deserved immediate attention, which didn't even pass the first test and went into the no pile, and then what might be a maybe. Maybe they seem to almost meet all the qualifications, or maybe they present really well, but I'm not sure based on their resume if they're right for the job. So they go into a maybe category for further exploration. Next slide, please. I always like to give students a roadmap for our time together. And this is up here, what you see here is what we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to do my best to answer questions as we go. You can send them to Dennis in the chat box, and I'll pause at the end of each major section that we cover so that I can answer questions. But I do want to make sure that we cover everything. So I'm going to try and go through things quickly and then save time at the end for more questions and answers. Next slide, please. We're going to begin with just some general principles to keep in mind. And so starting with just the fact that writing resumes and cover letters is hard. And I understand that. It's hard because you have to sell yourself. And no one really likes bringing attention to themselves in such a focused way. I mean, I guess some people do like it, but most people don't like it, right? And that may be especially true for some of us, because of what our culture has taught us, and particularly those of us who are women, and maybe those of us who come from communities of color, where we're just taught that you don't just talk about yourself that way. Well, I am here to tell you to get over it. Okay, I'm giving you permission to sell yourself because that's the only way that this works. You are your best advocate, and you just completed several years of training in the art of persuasion. So I don't want you to sell yourself short, but of course you can't oversell yourself either. But you can do this, and I'm going to show you the way. So also I want to mention that if you are the first in your family to go to college or law school, if you've struggled to get to this point in your career, or maybe you've faced challenges and maybe finances or family obligations or other things have held you back, think of those challenges and own them. Be proud of them. Okay, those are the things that made you who you are. And your unique experiences do matter. The very things that you think might set you back or hold you back have hopefully given you an incredible work ethic and given you humility and provided you with the grit and can-do attitude. And those are all things that an employer, you just can't be taught. I mean, those are things that employers really do appreciate and look for. So identify what makes you different, what personal experiences set you apart, and what have you overcome, and then sell these points as your assets. But do expect some competition, right? I'm going to be honest with you here. You're going to be competing for legal jobs with recent graduates who went to a really wide range of law schools. You're going to see that I rely on a lot of resources provided by the law schools, the career centers of Harvard Law School and Yale Law School and Berkeley Law School. And all these things are made available to their students, but they're also available to you on the internet. You can't compete with students who have these degrees. At least you can't compete with the degrees, right? But there is absolutely no reason that your resume and cover letter can't look as impressive. And in addition to your work ethic and humility and perseverance and grit, you have other things going for you too. You may have a local advantage in terms of going to a local law school and applying for a job locally. And you chose an opportunity school, which shows that you really are committed to your community. Finally, resume writing is something that you're going to do your entire career. You're going to update your resume all the time. And eventually some items that have importance on your resume are going to fall off. They're going to drop off in importance to make room for other more relevant ones. While you must always customize your cover letter, and we're going to talk about that later, you may find it necessary to customize your resume as well. Okay, we're going to move on to some etiquette for resume writing. One of the most important things to know about resume preparation, and you're going to hear me say this a lot tonight, is that presentation matters, and it matters a lot. So employers are going to spend anywhere from 7.5 to 30 seconds reading your resume. Studies have been done. And if they can't understand it or it takes them too long to read, it's going to go in the no pile. So your resume should really be one page unless you have significant, work experience. Many of you have a lot of work experience, but none of you have 3 to 5 years of attorney work experience yet. And that's what they're going to be looking for. So I would strongly recommend that you have a resume that's no longer than one page at this point in your career. You're going to see several examples today of how to set up your resume. Mostly it should be with everything left aligned on the margin and the dates all on the right-hand side of the right margin. If you have a really short resume, the headers might be centered to kind of space things out more, but we're going to go over that and see lots of examples. The whole point is that consistent spacing and alignment and tabs and margins, it just makes the resume easy on the eyes and it makes it more readable. You also want to have no typos and no misspellings. It doesn't exude confidence in a future employer if the materials you present to sell yourself are sloppy, because it makes me wonder as an employer, what are you going to turn into the judge? What are you going to turn into a client, right? So if I hire someone who's sloppy on paper, it makes me look bad. And again, one size does not fit all. So if you're seeking a job at a nonprofit organization, you're going to want to highlight certain things in your resume, like your service, your volunteer work, and your demonstrated commitment to access to justice. But if you're seeking a law firm job, you're going to have a differently focused resume. So preparing a resume is not something you do the day before it's due. I mean, sometimes that happens when you find out of a really great job opportunity and you realize you only have 24 hours to apply for it. before the window closes. But for the most part, you want to spend some time on your resume. Prepare it with enough time to find a proofreader so that someone else can read it. Next slide, please. We're going to continue on with some resume etiquette before we get into section by section of your resume. The information contained in your resume really should be concise, objective, relevant, and specific. And you're going to see examples as we go. You should use a narrative style, meaning that you want to use complete sentences and punctuation and accurate grammar. You're selling your skills and your assets and your experience and your professionalism. So you want to look professional. And by that, you really just need to be conservative. You need to use a very plain background, no creative fonts, don't include a picture of yourself. Don't be cute, be professional, okay? And of course, you want your resume to reflect who you are as a person, but it really needs to be objective, and it needs to, directly connect the skills that you have to the skills that the employer is seeking. It needs to contain certain things that we're going to go over more specifically tonight. So really keep your personal touches, your voice, your style, the things that make you unique. Demonstrate those in your cover letter. Those are better suited for your cover letter. Indeed, the whole purpose of a cover letter, which should accompany every resume that you ever submit, is to get the reader interested enough in you to read your resume. So we're going to talk about cover letters later as well. Next page, next slide, please. Okay, so one more slide here just on some basics about the fonts, because this is just a logistics question that everyone always has. Choose one font and stick with it, okay? Don't mix up a bunch of fonts. Use a very basic font such as Times New Roman. You want to try and keep your font size to a 12 point or an 11 point if you have to. Your name and possibly your resume headers might be bigger if you have space to work with in your resume. But as you get more and more experience, you're going to be really tight on space. So you'll probably end up keeping your headers 12 point as well. And you can make use of different stylistic stuff, all using the same font: bold, small caps, all caps, and italics. But do that sparingly and as appropriate. So let's go to the next slide and look at some examples, or look at one example here. I dug out my old resume from when I was a recent law school grad. And I don't want you to get too caught up in the details here, because we're going to go over each section later on. But for now, I just want you to notice how I use small caps. And I use the small caps for the headers where it says education, and also for the school names. And I like small caps, and everyone knows how to use small caps. How you do that, when you select from your font, it's a choice. Like you could choose bold or italics or small caps. It looks professional, and it doesn't take up a lot of extra space the way that all caps would take more space. So if you have a short resume, you can certainly use all caps if you wanted to. All right, so I'm going to pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to just look at what all the sections you're going to include on your resume are going to look like. And you're going to get a bunch of samples in your handout tonight, so don't worry too much if I'm going quickly on the slides. These are the sections that your resume are going to include: a header, education, experience, publications if you've published anything, languages if you speak anything other than English, and some section about your personal interests. So we're going to dive into each of these sections. And I do want to credit the job search toolkit that Harvard Law School provides online, because it provided a great framework for me to go over this with you today. We're going to go by each section by section with examples. And then there's going to be a lot of examples in the handout that you're going to get after class as well. Next page, please. So we're going to start, before we get to the first section, which will be, of course, your header. I want to make note of a couple of things not to include on your resume. A lot of resumes you see are going to start with an objective up top. It'll say something like, seeking an entry-level attorney position in an employment law firm with opportunity for growth, or something like that. You do not and should not include an objective. And here's why. Your objective is going to be different for every job, depending on the job that you're seeking. And quite frankly, when you think about it, your objective is to get the job that you're applying for, right? But more importantly, your career objectives and plans should really be expressed in your cover letter. So we're going to address that later. And then sometimes you'll see computer skills and law students will say, you know, LexisNexis or Westlaw or something like that. You really don't need to indicate that on your resume. It's expected that if you have a law degree that you can do legal research and you can use those programs. So I would only include a section on your computer skills if you have very specialized skills and they're relevant to the job that you want. Like if you're looking to work at a law firm that works very closely with engineers, then and you have some specialized skills with engineering software, then maybe it would be worth including. And on this point, I just spoke to an attorney recently who was doing a presentation about diversity and recruitment from some larger law firms. And he learned is that law firms are really hungry right now for applicants who understand technology. I still wouldn't necessarily call out all of your technological skills. I just want you to show them. So demonstrate them in the way that you describe your experience. Demonstrate them in the way that you present your resume and your cover letter by creating a single PDF and attaching it to your application. I'm sorry, to your email, sending in your application. So basically, you know, and just keep in mind, if a job announcement specifically calls out certain technological skills, then of course you can speak to them, but again, demonstrate them based on the experience of the skills that you have. All right, so we'll move on to one more slide that talks about what not to include on your resume. Sometimes at the bottom of the resume, you'll read something that says references or transcripts available upon request. Don't waste your precious one page of space saying that, okay? An employer will ask you for those things if they want them. And oftentimes, if an employer asks you for references after an interview, that's a good sign that the interview is going well, okay? So don't worry about including that. And then just a little bit further note on references. How do you provide references? You want to do it just as formally as you would provide a resume. So in the handouts, I've provided a sample reference page, and it's basically a separate document that stylistically matches your resume, meaning it has the same header, the same letterhead, lists 4 to 5 references, and that you have this document ready to submit electronically or in paper whenever you're asked. Your references will include the names, titles, email addresses, organization names, addresses, and phone numbers of 3 to 4 individuals who know your work ethic, and know your potential. And this initially might be a professor, right? Someone who knows your work product well. And then you might also want to include a brief sentence about how you know that reference. So you might say something like, my legal research and writing professor, or my professor at X job for 5 years. I'm sorry, my employer or supervisor at X job for 5 years, or something like that. Again, there'll be samples that you'll see afterwards. Always ask permission before listing someone as a reference, and let them know the type of work that you are pursuing, and inform them if you think they're going to actually get a phone call. Okay, next slide. We're going to start. Let me pause and make sure there's no questions, and just flag me down if you have a question. And then we're going to go into the first section of your resume, which will be the header. Okay, for the most part, your name is really the only place on your resume that you want to use a font size that's larger than 11 or 12. I'll show you an example in a minute, but if you have a short resume and need to fill it out, you know, that's a good time to do it. Be sure that your voicemail greeting is professional. Well, let me back up a second and just be clear that your header is kind of like letterhead, right? It's going to include your full name, your present address, a phone number, and an email address. So make sure that voicemail greeting is professional. That means no background noise or music. Use your full name. Speak slowly so you can be understood. And then you can use your law school email address if you don't have a professional sounding email address, or you can create a professional sounding email address to use for all your professional matters. I have found that younger generations rely on text messaging a lot more than emailing. So don't forget to check your email, especially when you start applying for jobs. And then this is a good time to remind you, excuse me, if you are job seeking, that you should go through all of your social media and make sure that there's nothing in those accounts that would be off-putting to an employer. And yes, employers do check your social media. No, I will not hire you if you demonstrate poor judgment on social media. And if you haven't really thought a lot about your public or your professional reputation, this is a good time to do so because you are professional now. You're a representative of the legal community, and some might even regard you as a role model now. So I want to just remind you about that. Okay, next slide, and let's look at some sample headers. I've numbered them. Okay, good. These come, they look pretty clear. I hope everyone can see them pretty clearly. Number one is my favorite style. It's professional, it's space saving, and it's easy to read. Number two is a really good option if you have a short resume and you need to kind of fill out the space. It also just looks really nice. Number three is a good option that saves even more space if you are really short on space. And you can see I use those little dots to kind of divide up the information on the second line there. Those dividing dots are about as creative as you should get on your resume. Don't go any more crazier than the dots, any more crazy than those dots, okay? Next slide, please. And we're gonna get right into the education section now. So your education section should be listed before your experience. It's gonna be the first thing on your resume after your header. And that's because you're a recent law school graduate. The experience that matters when you are seeking an attorney position is your legal experience. So once you have more than 3 years of time outside of law school and 3 years of legal experience, then your experience might end up being listed before your education, and your education kind of moves down to the bottom. But for the next several years, you're going to emphasize your education. All right, so the education section should reflect whether you transferred as an undergraduate or studied abroad, maybe you got a joint degree or received a graduate degree prior to law school. So you want to have all of your degrees there. However, you're not going to list your high school. And you know, some people do, especially in a smaller community, if they think that it would be helpful for geographic reasons, to show like you have roots in this community, or maybe because of alumni connections. But really, you can express that in your cover letter. You don't need to include it on your resume. And also don't list your GPA or your LSAT if you took it, because that's not necessary either. Okay, next slide. Some examples of the education section here. So these are two samples that show you two different approaches. They contain very similar information, just different stylistically. So the top version uses small caps. That looks a little bit more professional to me, but the bottom version using all caps is perfectly acceptable. The top version does not have any spacing between the education header and the schools that are listed. So it's a good option when you're short on space. The bottom version is a good option when you have more space available because you've got more spacing. You could do a variation or a combination of these two versions whereby you have small caps like the top version and more spacing like the bottom version. So, you know, the point is really just to make it easy to read, consistent, and formal.
Question with
Yeah.
education. How low, and you said don't, of course, put your high school diploma, but how about if you have a couple associates, a bachelor's, a master's?
Absolutely.
All of
Those are
it?
your degrees. Absolutely. Sure.
Okay.
Sure, certainly. Yeah, I would include all your degrees. And you know, there was a time when I was a baby attorney, my firm, my nonprofit organization that I worked in sent me to a specialized training at the Midwest Academy in Chicago, which is training for social organizing, social justice organizing, which was a component of the civil rights work that I was doing in LA. So for a while, I included that as part of my education, but I changed the header to say education and training. So if you have like a certificate or something that may not be a degree, you can still include that under education. That's a great question, James. The bottom, well, notice on the top version there, the top version, top sample, I don't identify the location of the schools because the location of the schools, the geographic location of the schools is really evident in the name of the school. But in the second section there, I do indicate where Cal State East Bay is because it's not evident that that's located in Hayward, right? And then I think San Luis Obispo College of Law or Kern County, Kern Law School, you know, that is really it depends on where you're job searching, right? If you're job searching locally, then everyone knows where San Luis Obispo College of Law is. If you're looking for a job outside of the county or outside of the state, for sure, you're gonna want to indicate where the school is located. They may not know it's located in California. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is only applies if you got some kind of honors in with your degrees. It could be that you got the highest grade in a certain class if your law school awards those sorts of things, or maybe you graduated undergrad with honors, right? One of the Latin honors. This is just a section to include. You can in the bottom sample there, the UCLA example, you see that the Latin honors are listed right next to the degree, the BA, magna cum laude. You could do that, or you could call it out in the honors section. That's just up to you. Just make sure that you define what the honor is for if it's not clear. At my law school, the jurisprudence award meant that I was first in that particular class. So I spelled that out. If you have many honors, you want to list only 3 to 5 entries. And you can see this top listing here for the Berkeley Law degree is too much, right? There's too many honors listed there. The point is not to, throw up the entire kitchen sink, right? You want to be selective. If you put too much there, it actually takes away from the degree. So what I would really do is I would not follow this approach, and I would think about what honors are most relevant to the job that you're seeking. So for example, if I'm applying for a job at an employment law firm and I happen to have gotten the jurisprudence award for the top grade earner in my employment law elective, then I'm going to list that, right? But something else might not be as relevant. Okay, next section, you could also have under your education, you might list the activities that you did at each school. So Dennis, we're on slide 17 now, please. Thank you. So here you can see I call out the separate activities. And this is any organizational memberships, reading groups, elected offices, activities, or sports that you participated in at your schools. In this example, I would argue that all the law school activities are relevant and should be included. I did not include a job that I had in law school as a legal research and writing teaching assistant, because that actually fits better under my experience because it's very legal, it's legal and it's relevant. However, in the undergraduate listing for UCLA, I list a couple of campus jobs that I held because they reflect that I was engaged and involved and I was holding down jobs while I was in school. But they're not law related. So they don't really meet the relevancy requirement for being included as part of your experience. And eventually, as your resume gets bigger and you have more and more professional experience, those kind of jobs are going to drop off. You might not even include an activity section anymore on your resume. Okay, next slide. And I'll just breeze through this. Sometimes if you have gotten a master's degree or a PhD, you've also done a thesis, so you can call that out as well. Okay, so let me see if there's any questions before we move on to the experience section.
All good.
All good, good. Estella, are you with me? Okay, good. Okay, so we're gonna go to the next slide and start talking about experience here. Okay, so let me just point out that when we talk about experience, that includes jobs, volunteer work, internships, externships, law school clinical work. So you might not think that you have a lot of legal experience as you go and apply for your first job, but if you've been doing clinic work at your law school, you've got experience, right? So I don't want you to forget that. I don't want you to underestimate it. Sometimes people will have a separate community service or volunteer section on their resume, and I don't really think that's necessary because for the most part, if you volunteered and you've really put some effort into it, then it's part of your experience, okay? Your resume is really designed to highlight your most significant and relevant experiences. So that means that you're not going to include every single job you've had or every volunteer position that you've had. You're going to probably leave out your earliest work experience, right? You don't necessarily need to talk about when you worked at Burger King when you were in high school, right? But you want to, tailor it with what makes sense. So even the work that you did in college might be pertinent now, but eventually will fall off as you get more and more legal experience. So just remember to list your most recent job first, list only the most significant and relevant jobs, and use reverse chronological order. Try to list no more than five experiences.
I have a
Okay.
question though, like,
Yeah.
if you want to put your military stuff in there, because that goes way back. That goes,
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I would count that as experience.
because I go back 20 years, but then like, how about the gaps between, because a lot of people want to know about gaps in employment, and then you
Sure.
kind of have to put more than 5 jobs to show.
That is a really good point. Yes, absolutely. And you can even, first of all, I still wouldn't put more than 5 jobs. I would include your military experience. It's something you never know who's going to be reading your resume, and that's going to resonate with them. It's also something that you should be proud of, and it's taught you skills, no doubt, that are applicable in anything you're going to do. What about gaps? That's a really good question. And you can explain them. You can be very direct about them in your cover letter. You could say, as my resume indicates, I've provided you with information about my, most relevant job experience, but I'm happy to talk to you about all the jobs that I've done in between, or, you could call it out in your cover letter and say, aside from the fact when I was in school, I've been employed since I was 16 years old, or aside from the fact when something like that, or it may be, when I got back, I'm just making this up. When I returned from my military service, I was diagnosed with skin cancer, and I needed to go undergo some, significant treatment. It was a really hard time for me. Talk about how that shaped you, right? That was when I had epiphany and realized I want to be a lawyer, or I want to do medical malpractice, or, something like that, right? So use those experiences to explain your gaps and explain, who you are.
I had a question as well, actually. So you're saying to do the most recent, not the most relevant first?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Because I've heard mixed reviews about that one. So I've done the most, because like for law, I want to put my law jobs on top instead of my restaurant jobs.
Sure.
So I've always, because they're not as significant and they kind of happen at the same time, but the most recent.
I'm going to answer your question directly in a moment, actually.
Okay.
That's something that I'm going to talk about directly. It's a great question. I also want to, so, if you have gaps on your resume, that's okay. Just be prepared to explain them. And that's something that, I'm going to talk about a little bit more as well as we go forward here. Let's move on to experience continued. Here we go. Descriptions. Descriptions really are everything, right? You want to paint a dynamic picture of the type of work that you did and the extent of your responsibilities, but you have to be careful not to exaggerate, right? You have to be truthful. You want to offer enough details for the reader to have a good idea of the type of work that you did. So for example, if you worked at a law school clinic, list the type of clients that you served and the scope of the cases that you handled, right? And again, tailor it. I'm going to show you, I think we have an example later on where I worked at a family law firm, which wasn't particularly relevant to me wanting to get this nonprofit job in civil rights. So what did I do was I highlighted the fact that the family law practice had a heavy focus on pro bono assistance for domestic violence survivors, right? So I found a way to focus in on the most relevant aspects of that job to fit the job that I wanted. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so you're going to use sort of a longer description to describe your more relevant experience. And a way to downplay, I see, yes, Ella, give me 1 second to finish this thought. The way to downplay sort of maybe a less important job, but still have it on your resume so that you don't show any big gaps, is just to talk less about it, right? Just to say, I managed a restaurant staff of 50 employees, whatever, something like that, if you worked in a restaurant. Isela.
Okay, so I kind of, probably like about a month and a half ago, I went through and like drafted a resume just because I knew I needed to get something on paper.
Yeah. Good.
So I just finished school in December, but I also have 10 years of legal experience. I
Mhm.
have worked my way up from being a file clerk to
Mhm.
being a litigation paralegal.
Right.
So I have exactly 5 firms on my resume,
Mhm.
and each one was a stepping stone. So
Sure.
I did go through after I had them all listed. I went through and was like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna like the very first one. I don't really need to list 10 things I did there. So I just have it. I provided administrative assistance. And
Exactly.
then the next one, it's a little bit more up
Yeah.
until my most recent one that I just,
Mhm.
that I was at until I am doing bar prep. And that's where I show, I did trial prep and I
Mhm.
did,
Mhm.
drafting pleadings and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
my question is to me, I feel like I understand like my law degree is like the most important, but I also feel like my stepping stones along the way, like starting at the bottom and being able to
Mhm.
like get my paralegal certificate, get my bachelor's degree, get
Mhm.
my law degree all at the same time, like the last 10 years,
Mhm.
like I don't want to like downplay my
Mhm.
experience either.
I agree with that. Now, remember, by listing your degrees first, you're not ignoring your experience. You're just not putting it first.
Okay.
You just don't want your fact that you have a law degree to be at the bottom of your page right now.
Okay.
You haven't had an attorney job yet. You've done some great work in the legal field, and you're going to absolutely want to highlight that. And I think your approach has been good to sort of talk less about the early positions and expand more on the more recent position.
Okay.
Um, Later on, you might end up collapsing all of them and just say 10 years of experience doing blah, 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 and just list the firm names with just like like an overarching description of all of them.
Okay.
Okay.
And then one other thing, I now in this, I also would like did property management, but it has nothing to do with legal. So like I've left it off. Is that okay, or is that something that I should?
If you don't have room for it, talk about it in your cover letter. In
Okay.
addition to my legal experience, I've also done this for the last 20 years or whatever, 10 years. And which, required consistent customer service and, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't forget your cover letter, you guys. You're going to hear it a bit. That's like the most important part here. So we're going to talk about that. There's a lot that can go in there. So yeah, do be prepared to explain if you have any gaps. And this is really going to be most important after you're done being a student, right? People understand if you have gaps in your employment when you're in school or when you're a student and when you're younger. But now that you're an attorney, you don't want to go long stretches without employment, without legal employment. And here's a tip for parents who might have taken time off or plan to take time off to raise children: is do whatever you can to keep your foot in a legal job, even if it's just a toe. If you can continue to do like very, very part-time work or volunteer legal work, you can include that on your resume, and then you don't end up having any gaps, right? You can say you were a volunteer attorney at Legal Aid for the last 4 years. And then, if it comes up in the interview, you can explain that more.
A question, like me, I'm retired and I'm just studying for the bar, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully I pass the bar this February, God willing. And they just say I don't pass, and then I have to take July, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not working because of that time. Can I
You
just
don't
say
have to. You don't have to not be working just because you haven't passed the bar. There's going to be stuff you can do. You can volunteer. Just because you don't pass the bar doesn't mean you need to have another year of unemployment. You see what I'm
okay?
saying?
But
Yeah.
could I say like, you know what? I just wanted to concentrate on, I mean, would that look bad on me? Like if I say, you know what? I just want to concentrate on passing the bar before I even start volunteering. Would that look
Well, you know what? Maybe
good?
we should talk offline, James, and talk
Okay.
about how to phrase it and how to frame it.
Okay.
Sometimes doing a resume is a little bit of a puzzle, and you just have to think about how to present it. Okay. All right. We'll be in touch. We can talk about that. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next slide, which is going to give you a little example, right? Um, this experience section, I show you that all the dates are aligned on the right-hand side. They're flush on the right. This just makes them easy to read. And employers are going to quickly skim to see continuity of employment. And again, this is especially true now that you have a law degree. Gaps in employment during school are, expected. If you worked at a job during the summer or for just a semester because it was like an internship or something, just say summer 2018 or fall 2020. And just note overall in this example, the use of complete sentences, action verbs. I'm going to include hundreds of action verbs for you to use. They're in the packet that you're going to get after this class. Note the focus on pro bono cases in the first entry. This is the family law job that I was telling you about. And let's see, this recent law school graduate resume does not include jobs that were held prior to law school. So again, if they're if they're relevant, you think about including them or mention them, in your cover letter. You can mention, I've worked since I was 18 years old or something like that. Okay, next slide, please. This is a hypothetical resume for someone who has worked through law school in a non-legal job. So in fact, this applicant has had very little legal experience, and that's okay. Remember that volunteer positions count towards your experience. So even though a current job, and this is going to get to the question that was asked earlier, even though a current job should generally be listed first, it seemed appropriate in this resume to list the only legal job on top. But this is really a judgment call. You have to make a decision that makes sense. I tend to prefer a strict reverse chronological order, but if this applicant is seeking a job at a legal aid organization, it might make sense to emphasize that internship at the Sunshine Legal Aid. But I wouldn't do this unless that experience is very recent. So here, the internship kind of overlapped with the current job as an office secretary at a school, at an elementary school. And so what it shows to me is that she or he were able to hold down two jobs at the same time, right? I mean, they worked this job and then maybe it was slow during the summer, so they also worked at the legal aid. So note again the use of complete sentences, details, action verbs, accurate but not over-exaggerated statements of achievement. You can see bilingual skills are highlighted. In her volunteer work at the senior center, she talks about how she identified new sources of funding. Oh, that was actually for that legal nonprofit. She talks about her ability to supervise others and raise funds. And you can see this person's loyalty based on the number of years of volunteering with the same organization and the number of years of employment at the same school office. So these are just things that like a nonprofit attorney and any attorney would really like to see, that sense of loyalty, ability to hold two jobs at one time. You can sell yourself even if you have not had a lot of legal experience, is what I'm trying to tell you. And again, just don't, just emphasize or the skills that you do have. All right. We're going to move on to the next section. Next slide, please. And this is if you've published anything, you can include a separate publication or publications section. Okay, just use proper blue booking. I will skip to the next slide, please. Okay, languages. I would say that this is by far the skill that will open the most doors for you. And, especially if you're looking to serve a diverse clientele or seeking a job in the public sector or in the nonprofit legal sector, and you're bilingual, that's phenomenal. But be sure not to overestimate your skills, right? Expect to be tested on the phone or in person when you interview. And then, a job where cultural competency is important, might be a valuable, it might be valuable to identify yourself as a native speaker if you are one, but just, be mindful of who your audience is and whether, unfortunately people do have negative attitudes, right? They have negative attitudes towards immigrants, towards folks with accents. This just gets back to that need to do your research before you submit your materials. Know who you are talking to. If you are applying for a nonprofit organization that serves 50% Latino clientele, then I would absolutely indicate that you're a native speaker, because it shows me not only that you have language abilities, but cultural competency as well. Okay, slide, please. Man, I wish I had Dennis in all my classes. Okay, so The interest
You're not the
section.
only one.
I bet. And yeah, I bet. Okay, so this is the section where you're going to include a little bit about yourself personally, your interests. And you might think of this as sort of an optional thing, but I would not omit it. And this is why. The interest section balances out your academic and your work experience, right? It makes you a whole person. Gives the interviewer some talking points, some springboard for conversation, and it personalizes you. Just be prepared to talk about the items that you list. If you say you are you have a black belt in karate, then just be prepared to discuss it, right? If you, and then of course you want to be careful not to list information that an employer should not be asking you and does not need to know, like your age, marital status, or whether or not you have children. Again, if you're short on space, and you still have to add a languages section and an interest section, then you can combine them. And I'm going to show you how. Next slide, please. Okay, so sample 1 up on top is how you would format your interest section, right? I would fit as many interests as you can, but only one line, right? Don't use your precious 1 page of space up. So just 1 line is enough. I'm sure you have many more interests, but just list the most important ones. The sample 2 is how you would format your languages and interest section if you're short on space, right? So here I would call it like skills and interests, and you can say that, you know, you're conversant in Spanish, and then shorten your interest so you can still fit it all in one line. And then example 3 is how you would format separate sections. And of course, you can do this if you have enough space on your resume. Okay, any questions? Okay, next slide, please. And this is going to be our last slide regarding resumes. This is a sample, and I know it's super small. This exact resume is in the handout that you will be receiving after this class. So don't worry if you're squinting to see it. But I wanted you to see the overall look of a final resume that brings together all the sections we've talked about: your header, education, experience, languages, and interests. Notice the way that the law school clinic and volunteer positions are included as experience. This is helpful for someone who doesn't have a lot of legal experience. Notice that required courses such as moot court and membership in something as simple as a student bar association are identified as law school activities, right? Those show engagement and they show that you participated in an oral advocacy class. Notice that this resume does not shy away from sharing personal interests that might elicit intrigue or jumpstart some conversation. And I'll just tell you, if I saw this resume, I would be asking myself, should I hire this person over someone with more legal experience or someone who graduated from an ABA law school? And the answers to those questions should be in the cover letter that accompanies this resume. So we're going to turn now to cover letters, but I just want to see if there's any more resume questions. And, you know, I don't see all of you at once, which is.
Do you put your honors that's not legal related? Like, for instance, when I was a pro agent, I got agent of the year and all my company military.
Sure. If you're including that in your experience section, talk about that honor in your experience section, right? In your description of that experience. Does that make sense? Like, say that, you know, tell me what it was again, James. Oh, I think James froze. Okay, hopefully we'll get him back soon. Can let me see. Can everyone else hear me or see me? Okay, thank you. Estella, you're the only one I can see right now. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to cover letter. We'll come back to James's question when he comes back to being unfrozen. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide and talk about some best practices for your cover letter. And I'm just looking at the time. Oh, goodness. Okay, we're getting close here. Anytime you submit a resume, you need to submit a cover letter. Okay, please do not write your cover letter in the text of an email. If you're being asked to submit a resume and cover letter, you need to write a letter, put it in a PDF, put it in one PDF with the cover letter followed by the resume. Okay, If you don't do this, it shows me that you are either lazy or you're not professional or both. And you don't want that, right? So what is a cover letter? It's the way that you capture the attention of the reader, right? You want someone to actually review your resume. A persuasive cover letter will get you noticed. A well-crafted cover letter demonstrates your interest not in just any job, but this particular job. And if you don't provide a cover letter, you're showing lack of interest. It suggests maybe you're not qualified or you're just not professional. So this is your first opportunity to showcase many abilities, right? Your ability to write, to be persuasive, to be professional, to demonstrate decorum, and to proofread. Your format of your cover letter should match the header or the letterhead of your resume. And figure out who you're writing to. Okay, find out who you're submitting it to and be formal. Use Mr. or Mrs., or you could use their full name in the salutation if you don't know their gender, or if you just want to be gender inclusive. You could say, dear Janet Yellen. Okay, if you don't know that she's a Ms. Okay, next slide, please. After your resume is done, and I promise we only have a couple more slides left, so I apologize that we're hitting up against the time, but it's because we had technical difficulties getting started. After your resume is done, every time you apply for a job, you're going to need to review and revise it. But that's going to be easy, right? Because you're going to be updating it as you get new jobs and new skills. Oh, James, you're back. Good to see you. I'll come back to your question at the end. However, you need to expect to spend ample time, most of your time, drafting and crafting your cover letter. Every time you apply for a new job, you must create a tailored, customized cover letter every single time. Don't have one that's just canned. Showcase your strengths. Offer a bird's eye view of your education, experience, and qualifications, but just don't rehash your resume. Use it as an opportunity to capture the things that you can't capture in your resume. And don't be overly casual, right? Don't be overly casual in your letter or in person when you meet someone. And this is one of my pet peeves. We're in a small community here in San Luis Obispo where a lot of people know people, right? And people use first names and whatever. Don't use first names, right? Even if you've met someone once before. When I receive a cover letter that is too casual, uses my first name for someone that really doesn't know me very well, it contains a typo or is not well organized, it goes into my no pile. I cannot hire someone who cannot write a simple letter. Okay. All right. Next slide, we're going to talk about your introductory paragraph. You want to demonstrate your enthusiasm for the position here. State who you are. You can say you're a current law student or a recent graduate. You might even say you are a law school graduate who qualifies for the California Supreme Court's newly authorized provisionally licensed attorney program and is applying for an entry-level attorney position as listed on X website. You might say something like that. If someone you know introduced you or suggested that you apply or told you about the job opening, you might mention that person's name. And then you want to state your thesis. And the thesis of your letter is basically the name, the position that you want and why you're the most or why you are qualified for that position, why you're a good fit. Next slide, please. We get into the main body of your letter. You want to elaborate, basically explain or offer the evidence to support your thesis, right? Show some excitement about the position or the company. Consider your own experience and maybe how it relates. Consider the firm's reputation or mission. Maybe that resonates with you. Maybe the firm's area of specialization is something that interests you. You want to connect your qualifications to the position that you seek. So if there's a job description out there, study it so that you can match your attributes to what the employer is wanting. Specifically, you can highlight relevant personal, professional, and academic experience. So if the employer is seeking someone who is highly motivated, you see that a lot. Talk about how you took it upon yourself to form an online study group when in-person classes came to a sudden end due to the pandemic, right? That shows you're motivated, right? If the law firm or the public agency or the nonprofit describes itself as fast-paced and dynamic, demonstrate your superior time management skills and your preference for variety in your employment by explaining how you worked full-time while obtaining your law degree and supplemented your legal education by taking as many clinical courses as possible. So you want to show, don't tell, right? Share stories and provide examples that your resume does not capture. So you don't want to really restate your resume, but use it to supplement. Next slide, please. This is your conclusion. You obviously want to thank the person for their time. And I have to tell you, a show of gratitude goes a really long way in showcasing your character. As an employer, I'm always looking for signs of a potential employee's character. I know someone that used to, when they would interview potential employees, they would only hold the interviews at a restaurant so that they could observe the applicant interacting with everyone at the restaurant, from the hostess to the busboy. And if they didn't see a level of respect to everyone, that was not someone they wanted on their team. Indicate that you would welcome the opportunity to speak by phone or safely meet in person to discuss the position you seek. You can indicate your contact information is listed above, because remember, it's in your header at the top. And if it's a cold call, meaning that you are not responding to a particular job announcement, you're just reaching out to the firm blindly and hoping that they might have something available, you could say, that you'll follow up by phone in a week, and then put it in your calendar and absolutely follow up by phone in a week, because you've just created a test for yourself and they are testing you to see if you follow through. Okay, questions about cover letters before we conclude tonight? Okay. Next slide, please. You're going to get a bunch of handouts. I don't know if they'll come from Dina or Dennis, but you'll get them. And included in there, you're going to find samples of everything we've talked about today, including a bunch of action words that you can use to make descriptive, active descriptions of the work that you've done. I drew on a lot of resources that are out there. You can find stuff online. You can find samples of law school resumes, but I just want to caution you to really keep in mind that not everything that's on the internet is going to demonstrate the best etiquette that we've been talking about tonight. But for the most part, the samples that I include in the handout, I either created or I think that they do fit and demonstrate the tips that I've shared today. Okay. Another tip about following instructions. If a job announcement asks you to submit a cover letter and resume, then you need to create 2 documents, combine them into a single PDF and submit them together. And know that that's your first test, right? You're being tested on whether you follow instructions. My protocol is then, if I am really impressed by someone's resume or cover letter, I will call them personally and talk to them. I am now testing your phone etiquette. I'm testing how you come across on the phone. So again, make sure, and I'm also listening for your voicemail message if I'm leaving you a message. If the phone call goes well, then I will invite them to, I will ask them if we can schedule an in-person meeting, and I will give them another test. I will say, please bring a copy of please bring a writing sample to that interview. That's another test. Again, the writing sample will have a cover page that matches your letterhead, and there's a sample in the packet that you're going to be getting. If the interview goes well, then I'm going to ask them to please email me a list of references. And again, that's another test, right? I want to see their follow through. So just watch for tests. I also strongly advise you to send a thank you note after you interview, right? These days, it's acceptable to send an email, a note, a thank you by email. But I tell you, there is something really professional and top notch when I get a handwritten thank you note after an interview, or even a letter, a formal letter that's now a PDF that gets emailed to me as a thank you. And there's examples in the packet you're going to get as well. Next slide, please. And I'm going to just return back to the things that I said you should keep in mind. Don't be shy about selling yourself, right? If you use the right tone and remain professional, showcasing your strengths is not bragging and it's not begging. You are your best advocate. Competition is going to be tough, right? So take the time to figure out what personal work and school experiences set you apart. If you've struggled or faced setbacks, you have also learned perseverance and you have grit. And these are skills that graduates from some of the best law schools may not have. Okay, keep that in mind. And I also just cannot underestimate the importance of making your materials look professional. You're going to be competing with graduates from some pretty spectacular law schools, but now you know how those graduates present themselves, right? I'm using the same format that someone from Harvard would use. You deserve the same high quality presentation, okay? And then your resume and your cover letter are going to take place over time. Okay, your resume needs to be updated often and revised with every new skill or job that you get. And your cover letter needs to always take the longest time to prepare because it has to be customized. And you want to do that with every job that you're applying for. So, in conclusion, I'm just going to say that impressions are everything. First impressions are everything. You want to present the best. It suggests that you're going to do the best, and then you can expect the best from your job search. Okay. So I'm going to now, next slide just, indicates some of the resources that I relied upon. And then our final slide there, we can actually close the slideshow